Hello friends, my name is Mariana, and today I've gathered a bunch of friends to recommend to you some of the strangest books we've ever read. Check out part 1 or the companion portion of this video, which is my discussion just listing some other books that I thought were really strange, and that is linked on the screen for you. And without further ado,
hi, it's Morgan, also known as Little Word Weaver, which is my booktube channel where I talk about books, writing, and a lot about fantasy, specifically Harry Potter lately. So when I heard that Mario was putting this video together and asking for strange books, I instantly thought of this book that I read once in England. It's called Century by Sarah Shipton, and I've never heard this book talked about by anyone else. I actually don't think I've ever met anyone who has read this book. It is about two sisters in a creepy old manor house. Their mother has died and they're not really questioning their life until the story starts, but it is always winter. And there's a little bit of a mystery setup and a little bit of like a ghost setting. It feels like a ghost story, and it's not disappointing for people who want ghosts, but it's nothing like a typical traditional ghost story. Everything about this book was interesting and different from what was expected. I enjoyed reading it. I felt like it was going in a good direction. I felt like it was consistently written. By the end, I was like 90% satisfied with the plot. There's a few little issues, but when is there not? I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, but my favorite thing about it really was the atmosphere and the tone and the characters. They were so interesting and so unique, and the plot itself was so different from everything that I read that I think it definitely fits this topic of strange.
Hi everyone, Thomas here from SFF 180. Now, science fiction is a genre with more than a few deeply strange books in its history, but if I had to focus on one book to represent the pinnacle of sci-fi strangeness, it would have to be Samuel R. Delany's 1974 novel Dhalgren, a dreamlike stream of altered consciousness epic running nearly 900 pages that threw every single rule the genre had established over the past 50 years out the window, and then boldly announced that the only rule is there are no rules. On the surface, it's a broadly mythic odyssey focused on a man, known only as Kid, wandering a lawless, ultra-violent, post-apocalyptic modern American city called Bologna, where he has just about every kind of sex you can think of and quite a lot of it. The narrative is a closed loop. The book begins with the second half of an incomplete sentence and ends with the first half of the same sentence. But to talk about the book in conventional terms of plot and narrative is to miss the point, since Dhalgren can't be bothered with either. Thematically, it concerns the fragility of power structures, the confrontational reality those power structures create between the sexes and races, sexual freedom, as well as sexual exploitation, and the underlying power dynamics of sex, and the unknowable nature of reality itself. It's easy to see how Delany, being both African-American and gay, at a time the very conservative white male science fiction field was not exactly comfortable with either, was committing a deliberate act of revolution. The book was and is a literary Molotov cocktail hurled at a police line, and it ruffled a lot of feathers. Philip K. Dick famously called it the worst trash he'd ever read, and for decades the joke among science fiction fans hasn't been, did you read Dhalgren, so much as how far did you get into Dhalgren before you DNF'd it? Even among its admirers, it's hard to find someone who's finished it cover to cover. But Dhalgren is also a book that has been in print for 40 years and sold more than 1 million copies. I won't say you'll have an easy time if you try to read it. In fact, you almost certainly won't. But as a shot fired across the bow of science fiction's pulpy cliches and conservative establishment, it remains a breakthrough book that opened the floodgates to all new voices and all new forms of creative exploration. I'll have a full-length review of Dhalgren on my channel sometime later this year.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. Normally you can find me on my channel BookChats or on Twitter under my full name, Caitlin Vanass. I reread the book I'm about to recommend to you guys just immediately before making this video. Just in the last 3 days, I reread this book so I could recommend it better, and I still cannot explain to you what this book is about. The book I want to recommend to you guys that is truly odd is Mortal Fire by Elizabeth Knox. I think initially this book seems odd just for its setting. It is set in the late 1940s and early 1950s in an alternate New Zealand-like place called Southland. Immediately the setting is unusual and different because it's not what I'm used to. The book sort of meanders slowly, and as it meanders, you begin to realize that there's magic in this world, and that the magic is both orderly and slippery. The magic is enormously complex. It's not like words, it's actually like one long song made up of words that were never heard before. And I read that when I was rereading this, and I was like, that is being used to describe something else in this book, but it could be used to describe the magic of this book. Ms. Knox has created this complex alternate New Zealand that has its own history and consequences. This book is only barely tied to her other series, but what happened in that other series has affected the place that it is set in a way that comes up in this book, just barely around the edges. And although this book has a resolution, it isn't truly resolved. At the end, there is still work to do, and there are still things to happen, and there are still questions that I have. I think it's worth reading because of its complexity in story and in characters, but it is a slow book. I don't want you to think that it is fast or that it has easy answers. It is slow and odd and strange, and I have found it absolutely worth reading, but I can't tell you whether or not you will as well. So my odd book recommendation is Mortal Fire by Elizabeth Knox, and I hope that you pick it up, and if you pick it up, please let me know, because I have so many thoughts on this book, and to me, one of the best things about books is the discussions we have around them, and I think particularly odd books, whether I like them or not, are the best books to discuss.
Hey everyone, my name is Maria and I'm from a new booktube channel called Sirius Reading. So when Martinez tweeted about a strange book we recently read, I couldn't help but think of The Vegetarian by Kang. I started reading this book and I thought I was going to be reading about a woman's life and journey through vegetarianism, but I was completely off. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are vegetarian aspects to the book, but it's not its sole purpose. The book is told in 3 different perspectives. Young Hai, which is the main character, Young Hai's husband, the brother-in-law, and the sister. So the first part starts with the husband. This is kind of when we see Young Hai transitioning into a vegetarian. She starts having these really weird dreams that make her want to become a vegetarian. We see the husband's reaction, the family's reaction, and just how all of Young Hai's actions have affected her entire family, not in a good way. The second part is the brother-in-law, and this is when things start getting really strange. So basically, the brother-in-law is an artist and he has this weird obsession with a birthmark. I'm gonna leave the description at that, but I just want everyone to understand this part of the book is very strange. Really weird things happen. At one point I remember having to put the book down because I was just like, what did I just read? So the last part in this section flows with the third section, which is told by the sister. This section to me is like the more heartfelt one. I really understood the book more after reading this section. It kind of opened my eyes as to what the message was, and it really made me appreciate the book. Once I did finish the book, I did some research on it and I read some reviews because I was so intrigued with the message I thought it was sending. And what I found out was that there's so many different interpretations of this book. I didn't realize it until I did some research and until I read some reviews of this book. It deals with like mental health. I saw it as like an innocence. Even though this book is extremely weird, I think if you're of age, you should definitely pick it up and read it and just kind of see what you interpret the book as.
Hello everybody, it's Katie from TheMirrorWorld. So this strangest book I've ever read in my entire life was The Singular and Extraordinary Tale of Mirror and Goliath by Ishbel B. This book is about 6-year-old Mirror. She got stuffed into a grandfather clock and something happened to her in that clock which made her very powerful and not entirely human anymore. She has a shape-shifting guardian called Goliath, and together they try to find out what happened to Mirror. Because she's so powerful, a lot of people are after her, including the Lord of the Underworld. The strangest of the book has a lot to do with the structure of the book, because it is hard to tell if this is very brilliantly structured or not at all. The scenes read completely random at first, and you have to figure out almost all of it for yourself. There are a lot of time jumps, and we don't really always get an indicator to where we are in the timeline. Also, there are a ton of POV characters. Almost every character who gets introduced gets at least one POV chapter. It kind of adds up to the confusion. But also that is what I really loved about the book, because it makes it very unique and, well, very strange. Also very strange I found the writing. It is very lyrical and very poetic and may not make a lot of sense to some people. And that kind of adds up to a very interesting reading experience. So you have to really stay conscious and focused all of the time while reading. But it takes you on a ride and is really enjoyable. at least for me.
I'm recommending Things We Set on Fire by Mariana Enriquez. This is a collection of short stories I think is best described as social commentary wrapped up in gothic horror. At first glance, I think it might seem like Enriquez is relying on these twists or these injections of creepiness to really carry her story, but I feel like the big picture is that those twists carry their own kind of commentary about violence and about the creepy things that are born from the minds of evil men. A lot of times in these stories there is no conclusion, or all of the horror is really implied or off screen, or it doesn't really hold your hand. Enriquez has a tendency to leave you stranded in the middle of the darkness of her story. I feel like this is the perfect read for October, especially if you read a story every couple of days and just kind of spread out that creepy factor throughout the month. It's also translated fiction for those who are trying to read some more of that, and it depicts some of the social aspects of Argentina, which is something that I really appreciated. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars.
Hey everyone, it's Kayla from Bookadoodles. When I think of strange reads, I definitely think about I Hate Fairyland by Skottie Young. This is a comic pretty much that is Deadpool meets Alice in Wonderland. That's how I've seen it described. This story follows a young girl named Gert. She was sent to Fairyland when she was very young, and to get home all she had to do was cross the land and find a key. Flash forward some 20 years later and she still has her young body. However, her mind is cynical and she's aged and she's fed up and she murders everything in her path trying to find this key, and she is just done. She is just done with this world. It's also really bizarre because normally you're used to people being happy in lands like this. Not this girl. As far as the Deadpool reference, it's very gory, and the gore doesn't really strike you as grotesque, however, because the art is so beautiful and colorful and vivid, which makes it kind of okay with your mind. For example, in the early pages, she murders the narrator, which happens to be the moon, and it's depicted on the back of this trade paperback, and I can't even say how weird this read was. I definitely recommend this if you like comics, if you like strange and bizarre things. I definitely recommend it if you like cynical characters that provide humor. I cannot wait to get to the next volume, and I hope you try it out.
Hi everyone, my name is Saniya, and my channel's name is SaniyaWalu. For today's weird book recommendations, I'm going to be talking to you about As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. This book is set in 1920s Mississippi, and it's following the family called the Bundrins after their mother Addie dies. She dies in the first couple of chapters. It follows this family's pilgrimage to Jefferson, Mississippi, where they plan on burying their mother, and that happens to be her dying wish. The book, if you think about it, kind of serves as a foil to the glitzy 1920s books like The Great Gatsby. What you're getting in this one is the poorer white community of the South during the 1920s. You read this book from 10 different people's points of view. So with that in mind, this book is a mess, to say the least. You as a person, when you're talking to yourself, are not going to be describing word for word what you're seeing, because you're consciously present in your own mind. That doesn't need to happen, and that's very clearly reflected in all of Faulkner's characters. They're not describing ongoing things and their thoughts for other people. They're in their own heads. So you're not getting a cohesive narrative. It's dialogue interspersed with personal thoughts, interspersed with their pilgrimage, interspersed with other side conflicts that are personal to the characters and that are just background noise in general. So it's this hodgepodge of just absolute chaos from the very start. So this is a weird, experimental, kind of surreal, stream of consciousness narrative of this really dark event in this family's life that, because it's written so weirdly, kind of takes the turn for funny, but not actually humorous, more like nervous and freaked out laughter. And that's just the entire tone of the book. It's an interesting read, to say the least, and I certainly recommend you read at least one of Faulkner's books. This, I think, is definitely a lot better than reading The Sound and the Fury by Faulkner, but that's just my personal opinion.
Hi, my name is Kayla and I am from the channel Heroic Pages. Looking at my bookshelf, there's really not very many strange reads on my bookshelf, let alone ones that I can recommend to you, but one did stand out to me that I read back the beginning of 2016, and that is The Night Gwen Stacy Died by Sarah Bruni. This story revolves around two young people who embark on this adventure that is just weird and strange. Our main character, Sheila, she works at a gas station, and she meets this guy who calls himself Peter Parker, and he robs the gas station, and she just joins him, takes all the money, and skips town with him. They end up hiding out in Chicago. They were in Iowa, and from there they have this relationship, and it's just very, very strange because they barely know each other. They did this on a whim. The story goes into his backstory, being raised by his mother and his brother's death, and it's just very odd. This is very much an adult contemporary. It's about them finding their identities, their first love, their first loss, all of that. I felt very much like the ending of it was almost fate-driven, and the twists in the end just left me thinking, what did I just read? Definitely recommend you read this and then talk to me about it, because I have no one to talk to about this book and how very strange it is.
Hi, my name is Maisie from SleepyWiredStudios, and today I'm going to be talking about a very strange book called The Bad Girl by Latin American author Vargas Llosa. Vargas Llosa's The Bad Girl is a enthralling tale. It tells of a guy who in 1950 in Lima, he falls in love with a girl named Lily, and this boy named Ricardo finds out that she said that she was from Chile, but it comes to light that she's not from Chile, and she lied about her name and her nationality. And then about a decade later, he goes to Paris and he finds a similar person to Lily, but she refuses to acknowledge that she's the exact same person. And every time he moves around the globe, he somehow runs into Lily, but he never really finds out who she truly is. This book pits the old antique ideal of one's true love against the more modern consumeristic nature of love, and it's just a wonderful back and forth. I loved Ricardo as a character. He was deplorable at times, but no one is wholly good or wholly bad. He was a perfect narrator. I felt his pain and his suffering. The progression of the characters in this book was really, really well done. I really did love the side characters a lot more than Lily. I have a few problems with Lily as a character. She is deplorable. She is money hungry. She doesn't see love as romantic. She sees it as a way to get things. And Ricardo struggles to come to terms with the idealized version of Lily in Lima is not the Lily who he comes across a decade later. And it's just those marrying of those two ideas which he's trying to separate. I really love this.
Hi, it's me, Sabrina from Steakaccino, and the strange book I'd like to talk about today is a novella by independent author and booktuber Charlotte Ann Hamilton. That book is called Lambs Can Always Become Lions. This is the first novella in what's going to be a series. The reason that it's strange is that it's historical fiction, but it's really diverse and the diversity is done really well. It's pathetic that makes it strange. It's really unusual to see that in historical fiction. I often hear that adding diversity to books that would traditionally just be super heteronormative and white makes it wrong or not historical or takes you out of the story, which is just absurd to think. But none of those things were true about this book. It didn't take you out of the story. It didn't seem non-historical. It was absolutely fantastic and I loved it. So Robin and Marion are both girls in this book, and there's also a practicing Muslim character whose name is Edda. She eats halal, prays multiple times a day, wears a hijab, and that's all accepted within their group. Also, there is a non-binary or gender queer character. I'm not sure about the terminology because I don't think one was used,
but they use they, them pronouns, and that was presented, again, just really naturally in the story. It didn't seem out of place at all. It was just, you know, like normal people using they, them pronouns. It was fantastic to see. And then there's also a character who I believe is going to be, it's going to be made clear that they're ace, but in this book, because they're kind of a background character, that didn't really come up in the story, but it was hinted at that that they're ace. That's Little John. So I was really thrilled just to see all kinds of different things going on in this book and see it done really well. Honestly, the only thing that I didn't like about this book is that it was a novella, so I have to wait for the next one. I'd really recommend it. Again, it is Lambs Can Always Become Lions by Charlotte Ann Hamilton. Check it out.
Hi everybody, my name is Rachel from Rachel Hobson. I have a booktube channel here on the YouTubes. I'm here to talk about like a read that really had its like WTF moments. And for that book, I'm recommending Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. This book is nonfiction. This is a memoir where Jenny Lawson just talks about living with mental illness and her experiences from that. We kind of follow her, and what I mean by that, she just tells like stories from her life, and it was hilarious, but at the same time it was there was times where I was exasperated with her and it was exhausting, and it really opened my perspective when it comes to mental illness. Like, I deal with my own things. I have anxiety and other things, but I've never had seen it through a different set of eyes before. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. It was exhausting. I want to say Jenny Lawson has ADD, and it's really, really prevalent in her writing. Like I said, she tells these stories, but she would constantly go off on these other stories and then go back to these other stories until like wrapping up her point. And the whole like WTF kind of things is just like the stories that she would tell. After all these ridiculous stories, it definitely had a really nice like wrap up to it. She was able to wrap up on like how we're not alone. And I think one of the biggest things that I got from the book is this quote: "Quitting may be easier, but wouldn't necessarily make things better," which I find to be incredibly encouraging. So it was very funny, and there were even a couple moments that made me choke up a little bit, because like I said, I deal with my own things, and just being able to relate to her on some of these things like choked me up a little bit. It was also very, very encouraging. So I highly recommend Fiercely Happy by Jenny Lawson.
Hi, I'm Tim Boffman. I am the author of a blog called That Tiny Website, where I do a lot of writing and short story work, as well as a lot of video game discussion. And I am also the author of a compilation of short stories by the name of An Epilogue to Innocence. Start off with one that's very well known for the whole plot of the book is the major reason it's known. A book by the name of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. You know, time-honored story of boy meets girl, falls in love with girl, but with the whole, this is not a good thing because it's pedophilia. And I know that is a huge turnoff in the case of a lot of books, but it's really interesting to get into the mind of someone that is as warped as the main character of that book is, and how they try and justify it for themselves. And it's a really interesting read to kind of see the perspective of people who do things that are outside of societal norms, even if you don't agree with them. Final book I would recommend is a book by the name of Mila 2.0. It's by Deborah Driza. It's about a girl who spends the first roughly quarter of the book finding out that she is a robot, an android, and you know how she handles that and trying to handle being a teen as well at the same time. It's a very unorthodox premise to a book, but a really good one nonetheless.
If you've read any of the books on this list or are interested in any of them, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.